Thanks for coming in, Ed. See ya. Oh, thank you.
Well, should we sit?
Yeah, there you go. You're going to control this.
All right.
Okay.
I don't really have anything to say other than, hey, thanks for joining us in this combo work group meeting. I'm going to sit down and hopefully I won't fall asleep. So, look at that. This is comfortable. This isn't too embarrassing. What? Right? It's like a way to look manly. Jesus.
Can we get him a pillow, please? Somebody?
Yeah, right. I know. I need
out in the crowd. Just like sit there right
And a
behind you in my
blanket too
backpack.
for John.
So this really was born out of just some discussion where we thought that the two work groups, R&D and Interop, have really worked a lot together. We've thrown some things their way. They've thrown some things our way. And we're kind of working to solve some of the same problems. And R&D, we're kind of looking for some new things to chew on. So we're a little light, but it felt like this would be a great opportunity just sort of to combine and discuss our initiatives and get some feedback from you folks.
Absolutely, and we're always doing that in a very pro-competitive way. So we just want to remind you that RESO strives to increase competition in the marketplace and will not be a forum for anti-competitive conduct. We don't need any more issues, so if you're thinking about it, don't. Just don't. Yeah. All right, Greg.
Oh yeah, I'm Greg Moore. I'm the CTO in Portland, Oregon. I'm the chair of R&D, and it's always a pleasure to be here. Let me say that.
John Breault, Vice Chair of R&D, Vice President of MLS for statewide MLS, and I do not speak any other languages other than English, so that AI simulation was interesting.
But you speak English real good.
Oh, I do a great job of that. I can barely handle that.
And I'm the lowly workgroup chair in between the two board members up here, but I'm Chris Haran for MRED and work with interoperability. And I've been on that group for a few years since it got chartered, so it's been exciting stuff as we work through it. It's changed quite a bit, and we just got 30 minutes added to our time. They obviously like our jokes so far, gentlemen.
Yeah, that's going to get cut
We got up
quick.
here and it said 30 minutes. I was like, oh, Sam was really nervous about this one. And then we're missing Catharine, but hopefully she's watching virtually. But Catharine's the vice chair for Interop, and she's the founder and CEO at Listed, has been a great help, and not just Interop, but she actually participates in a ton of different work groups throughout RESO. Which is very helpful for our group because she brings that information back and shares that with people who maybe don't get to be on as many work groups out there. So, Catharine, we miss you. Hope you're having a good time, but glad that the rest of us are here. So for today, we did want to give a quick update for those of you who don't get to sit in both of our meetings, what our groups are all about. We are going to talk a little bit about how we work together, like John was mentioning, and cover a little bit about what we're working on. And then we're going to have, hopefully, what we'll call a creative brainstorming exercise, where we're going to do a little bit of a roast of some of the standards out there. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means when we get a little bit closer. So, turn it over to R&D, talk a little bit about your group.
Sure, yeah. So as R&D, we're really, as they say, the top of the funnel. So, I mean, the good news is, think of pain points, think of interop, broker, advisory groups. Those guys really are the ones who bring those, issues, problems, great ideas into R&D. And really what we do is kind of create the business case and do some of that, research development. Think of the unique licensing ID with Josh had built some really cool tech, at least so we could have a really solid proof of concept. And then, as you can see, then they move on normally to the more technical groups for implementation, et cetera. Some groups have been spun out of R&D, ULI being one of them. The unique property identifier was another idea that came and actually needed a whole work group to carry all that water and figure that out. So that's really what our role is. And we're open to listening to you. As John said, we're kind of looking for some new ideas, some new problems to solve. So we'll be hanging out at Pain Points too, making notes, and feel free to contact us.
And for Interop, we started off with kind of a narrow mission at first. We were working on transaction management to transaction management interoperability. And since then we've expanded a little bit, we've started talking about offer management, but especially in this last year, we've thought a lot more about how we interoperate with even the standards in RESO itself and with the different work groups. And so we've worked a lot, obviously, with R&D. We work a ton with what transport's doing. And what we think about is how do we mix the business and the tech? Because obviously interoperability from a system definition is passing data back and forth between systems, but it's also about cooperation, which cooperation is really, really big in this industry. And cooperation often comes down to the business cases. And we've talked a lot lately about the best practices guide that RESO is working on. Paul mentioned it just a few minutes ago with the RESO blueprints, and how can we come up with business stories and user stories that bring to life some of the great work that's being done in all the, especially technical work groups. So yeah, we do look beyond the traditional MLS to MLS. We are looking at how do different organizations in the transaction interoperate together? How do they interoperate with the MLS? How do they interoperate with each other? So it's interesting to be able to step outside a little bit of that kind of MLS to MLS role and look at that. So how do we work together? And yes, this is very much how interoperability works with R&D in a lot of cases. We get some great ideas from them. They hand it down to us, and we talk about it in the group and try and figure out like how can we help make that happen. And I think we've got a really good example we talked about in the last conference. So John, I don't know if you wanted to expound a little bit on the payloads case and how you guys...
Not really.
Oh, okay, good. Well, we'll skip past that then. No.
Do I? What are we talking about?
No, we've had, so we've had back and forth of like the payloads case where we wrote up a business case and sent it to R&D. And then just recently you sent us experience record, which we debated vigorously, and then you talked us out of it, even though you sent us the case. So it's always fun in those work groups how that process works.
Well, I mean, the thing is, these things come from pain points, and there are a lot of things that we look at. And in fact, one of the things that Sam even presented earlier that we're kicking to CMLS for part of their best practices. It seems like a logical place to start with RESO. That wouldn't it make sense if we could build this thing and it could be a resource and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so we, as part of the process, as we sort of look at it and we think, okay, we sort of agree with the concept, but number one, from a mechanical perspective, how would this thing even work? Is it something that somebody would build this thing? And number two, is it really a space for RESO at all? Is it really related to standards, or does it belong somewhere else? So for example, the data,
The experience record or
the one that was Sam presented this morning. God, this is terrible. Sorry, guys. I'm the post-lunch funk here. The data processes, the spreadsheet basically for an MLS to use so that data consumers can find out what sort of information is available from the MLS, the processes to get a data feed, et cetera, et cetera. We took that and we actually combined it with a separate recommendation, which was about display rules, because there's also, as a data consumer, no easy way to know the display rules relative to your IDX feeds. And so we looked at that and said, well, it wouldn't be great if RESO sort of built this resource and the MLSs could contribute to this resource, and it became sort of this big, huge, unwieldy thing, and there are some issues related to whether or not MLSs would necessarily even want to provide that thing into this database and all of that. And so it ended up becoming, that's why we sort of kick these things back and forth, but in some cases it becomes just sort of a best practice, an optional, in this case, an optional spreadsheet where MLSs can choose to serve up that information and host it on their website or whatever, provide it in some other way.
Mm-hmm. And this diagram that's on the screen now, I know it came from RESO strategic planning when we were talking about how the groups work together. Either of you gentlemen like to kind of walk us through this?
Sure. And I mean, it's, as you can see, really, you guys are at the top of the funnel, right? I mean, that's where the ideas come from. That's where the needs come from. That's where innovation comes from. Broker advisory, obviously, is a great input place. Because, I mean, they've got needs to run their business, the cooperation and those things. And then normally, as you can see, lots of stuff comes into R&D, where we kind of formalize it, as we said, and then it works onward. I mean, you can see all the kinds and breadth of work data dictionaries doing that really, as you can say, really work on the creation side of the standards. And then, you've got transport, really, that it kind of gets into that implementation. How are we going to really technologically do this? And then we get together as chairs for a board liaison committee once a month. So, I mean, we're all talking about what we're doing, where those overlaps are, or really what may be coming your way, depending on, or my way, and John's way, depending on how that need or what needs to be done to kind of move along. The board, obviously, helps with the adoption. I mean, that's where, we begin that implementation and on we go. And then, it really is that spiral. And as you can see, there's really been lots of great improvements. There's been a lot of great technology, from the very beginning of RETS, if you think 20-something years ago, now to where we are using an API that's really much more standard. The technology is much more solid. It's easier to implement, those kinds of things. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a great organization, and thank you guys, for your participation, because that's what makes it really work.
And this was a graph we wanted to share, but just because it is interesting to see how all the groups work together and what the process is, because it is, primarily volunteer driven, and we're, as Paul mentioned, this process is trying to speed up, but this is what we're trying to push it through to make sure that we have some consistency around how things are created, implemented, and then pushed back through the funnel again. So, anything to add on that, Joe?
I mean, I guess the way to look at it is, if data dictionary is the what, and it transports the how, R&D is sort of the why, right? We're busy ourselves with the why, and is this something that should be part of the standard, et cetera?
And I mean, a great example is, like John was talking about, that spreadsheet would probably end up at CMLS because they're working on best practices. Right. And I mean, so there are appropriate partners even beyond RESO that we do lean into, and maybe you'll find that many people are the same volunteers and they're heading work groups there. So there is overlap. And I think it gives us a great, place to take some of these things that are much more, I think, business process related and getting them well defined and then out there to kind of sometimes a bigger tent. You think that, many MLS executives go to CMLS meetings, et cetera. Where I know for my organization, my CEO has never been here. He thinks that's my job. But it's nice, when we all can get together somewhere and also kind of talk about that overlap.
So that's the process and how we work together, not just our two groups, but really all the groups at RESO. So now we want to talk a little bit about projects that our individual groups are working on and some of the back and forth there. So the first one that's up there, identifying proper tags for payloads, that was a business case we submitted to R&D that they talked about and liked the idea and approved it at, it was either the last meeting or the meeting before, actually, last conference, rather. And the idea behind this is it's not necessarily like changing anything from a technical specification. It's trying to help understand what fields make sense for your particular use case. So, as an example, one of the things we're working on now is, transaction management, offer management, things like that. Right now, if you look at the certification dashboards, there's a little drop down that says IDX. And when you click that, it tells you if you're running an IDX website, these are the resources and fields that you should likely use to populate that IDX website. And the idea is, well, why can't we do that for other use cases too, right? Like, why can't we do that for transaction management? Why can't we do that for showing services? Because they don't necessarily need to use everything that's in the data dictionary. They have very specific needs and use cases. And those payloads are not going to be mandatories by any means. They're just the idea of to help you filter it a little bit more if you're looking for that. So that's one of the things we're working on right now, and that directly came from back and forth with R&D. It was a great conversation, and our group started putting that together and working with different subject matter experts to start tagging that. And the idea is when you download the DD Wiki, there's going to be a separate column for payloads. Right now it just says IDX in there, but in the future that's going to say things like TM, OM, things like that. So that's been some pretty exciting stuff to work through there. I'm going to come back to the second one in a second because that is more to do with the rest of the presentation. We do still continue to research offer management and transaction management for new resource fields and standards. There is a transaction management collection that's added to the data dictionary, if you haven't seen that, that does have some new fields and keys related, and then we're going to add the payload tagging on top of that, so make that really useful for transaction management providers. And then offer management's been very interesting to us, and in our work group, we've been going back and forth of collecting the metadata, and we've had great participation from several people in the space. And what we found is that really there's not a ton of unique information that's needing to be created there, which is one of the things that Interop really does try and focus on is we don't want to create a bunch of new standards and fields and resources just to create. We do want to see, is there really a need or does this already exist elsewhere? And when we really started digging into offer management, maybe there will be a couple of fields that we recommend at some point, but more and more what we're seeing is, especially if you look at forms, all of those fields are already represented in the data dictionary by and large. What you would actually pass back and forth between two offer management vendors if you were having separate systems talk to each other. But that's part of the process and part of the conversation is you have an idea, you think you're going to come up with something really neat, cool, unique, and then you dig into it, you gather the metadata from the vendors, from the people participating, and you realize, no, we can just find another way to use what we already have, what already exists. We don't have to add additional bloat necessarily. So it's been a great thing working through that. And then the final thing that we've been working on, and we're just getting started on this, and that's really what today's presentation is hopefully going to do. In addition to helping fill the backlog for these guys, it's also going to help us with some of our homework, which is adding to that best practices guide and helping to write some of those stories, collect some of that information. The idea is that there is a lot of really, really useful information, useful tools at RESO. And sometimes you just have to be a little creative on how you use them. Like the initial purpose that someone might have submitted for creating an RCP is a good one, but when you take a look at it from a different angle, could you come up with other use cases, other ideas on how to use that? Maybe something that's not as intimidating to jump into so you can get some sort of proof of concept out there. That's really what we've been talking about a lot in our group is how do we mix that little bit of business and technical and get the idea. So if the CEOs, for example, are not in the room, how can we come up with the stories to share with those CEOs to understand what the business case, the business need is to implement some of these standards? And we'll have an example of that, how MRED, the company I work for, has done something like that with RESO to move forward on some of our projects later on. But first up, we have the projects at R&D that you guys, actually, I'm going to talk about this now, and then I'll do projects at R&D.
There you go.
Yep, messed up my transition there. So,
Smooth.
how many people were at Clarity in February? Okay, so you guys all showed up to RESO because I teased this slide, but we ran out of time, so I couldn't actually talk about it. So you're welcome to Sam and the staff that I managed to bring so many people to RESO for you here. What we did we were talking about RESO standards and how MLSs could become more proactive in using RESO standards and really push some of this change. Because that's the thing, when you're looking for implementations, while our group does look for companies outside of the sphere of MLS, there's still a lot that's driven by MLSs in this space and needs to be driven by MLSs. So in September of last year, MRED, for the first time ever, hired a few developers to work for us. And for those of you who've known me for a while, you'll know that I've gotten up on the stage several times and said that I was the only technical talent at MRED and I could only code hello world and basically 1 or 2 languages. So basically we were very vendor driven, worked with a lot of product, but we didn't build a lot of our own things. And because of the way that the environment is changing, we are realizing there are certain things we do need to build and do need to control. Not everything, and actually not even most things, but there are certain things we want to do there. And like most MLSs out there that are looking to grow, we also were looking at the whole front end of choice, system of choice, input of choice, to Richard's comment earlier. Whatever you want to call it, the idea that we wanted to have multiple MLS platforms. What we wanted to do, though, was we wanted to have an environment where you truly could use the entire MLS platform. So if you liked the search and the listing input, you could use that search and listing input. We didn't want to have necessarily like our own separate input that we packed on top of each of those. We did want to have the full experience if you wanted to go there. And I was sitting down with people who had come from outside the industry and they needed to get on the learning curve really, really quickly. And we put them through the Working with Real Estate Data course, which actually, Paul, I had a good suggestion from Gail on our team that it really should be called T-Red, not Red T. Like if we're going to go with the T-Reds, like maybe you should flip that around a little bit. So just a suggestion from the crowd there. Then you have your logo and everything. But what we wanted to do is we put them through that course and we came back and said, okay, let's look through the transport GitHub and let's look at like what's all out there and what can help us, what can speed things up for us, because we're not a big team, it's only a couple of us. But we wanted to move relatively quickly and we wanted to use things that already existed as much as we could. So what you see here, this should be a pretty simple diagram that I think most people would recognize if you have more than one MLS vendor. You've got 3 different MLS vendors up there. You've got a rules engine that hopefully they're all following to some degree or fashion. For us, we wanted to have listing, edit, and search in between them and our source database. That source database needs to be fed by our membership roster because that's what's going to populate all those different MLS vendors. And then we have our data delivery out of our source database. So I'm not going to put any names to any of this because there's plenty of people in the space and don't want to necessarily play favorites up here. But I do want to talk about, well, what can we do to make this happen? So for rules engine, obviously you take a look at validation expressions and how can we use that to have a consistent standard way to pass our rules from our engine into these different MLS platforms. That way they're all following the same rule set and they're staying up to date whenever we make changes. Not that we make a lot of changes in the industry, we never change our rules ever at all for any reason. But when we do need to make that change, making sure that happens right away. Then we also looked at Web API core expressions, because obviously with MLS, we want to be Web API certified. How can we make sure we're passing that back and forth? We then have talked a lot about the add, edit, endorsement, creating, updating, deleting, everything we need to do there. And for us, yes, there's MLS vendors on here, but we've also had a lot of interest in our market from brokerages, whether they want to create their own or if they're working with other vendors who want to add or change something within the listing itself. They want to do some part of it. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Obviously, data dictionary for data delivery. We're already up on 2.0. Thank you, MLS Grid, for that. We've talked a lot about the association resource in our group. That's going to be, quick plug for tomorrow's roundtables. We're going to spend some time talking about association data. I think there's 3 different groups that I'm in right now where we're talking about association and member data. and how we fix that. So that's been a really interesting conversation to continue to have. UPI and ULI, both two things that we're very interested in how, especially if we're having all these different systems and we start to dip our toe into data share, how do we keep track of all the property information going back and forth? And how do we keep track of the agents? Like, how do we make sure we have the right person all the way through all of the different systems? So obviously, we're going to have to talk about the unique organization identifier too, because we're going to have 3 different MLS systems that are creating content and feeding into that source database. And then we've got all these other really cool things that have just been ratified or in the process of being ratified that we thought, well, what can we do with this too? Like, are there ways to make things a little bit better, a little bit easier, to be more efficient, to save more time? Including, common schema we're going to talk about, autofill service. The 27 and 28 has been really fascinating to talk about with some use cases there. And then 43 local fields is relatively new, but that's something that our Interop work group talked about at the last conference, which is how do we define our local fields and make that part of our packages that get delivered out, our payloads that get delivered out. So just like we have definitions for standard fields today, can we do the same thing and define our local fields? Because that's going to make mapping so much easier for anyone we work with if we have that done. So essentially what you see before you is a diagram we drew, and then we said, okay, where do we fit RESO in, and where can RESO help us? I would highly encourage, especially the MLSs in the room, more than anyone else, to think about this when you're thinking of any project like that, is draw up what you want to do, and then go back to what we have at RESO and say, where does RESO fit in? Where can they help us? This is not like a super complicated exercise, but when we started digging into the different endorsements, the different ratifications, different RCPs, it really helped us create a lot of ideas internally on what we can do with all the information that's out there. So. And now, projects at R&D. After all the projects that Interop is working on.
There you go, crickets. Yeah, we got nothing right now. But just to go back to that previous slide, that's sort of, this is kind of a great, after the sessions we had this morning, because they're actually putting into practice a lot of what we tried to visualize here, that they're using standards and using them to get things done in the real world, right? It's not just tech speak that we just come and do this stuff. They're really trying to solve real world problems. And so that's really our hope, is that we look at this, that you are thinking about doing something from a business perspective, you see what's there, and then we can fill in the gaps. If there's something we need to do, we can discuss it on R&D and add to the standard. But just as an example, so one of the panels, Real Grader, was talking about the business card app, right? Mm-hmm. And that and so a lot of the agents see it, and then they realize that the photo is not up to date and all that. And I said to him afterwards, I'm like, well, maybe you want to think about add edit for your app. So now when the agents see it, they can actually upload their photo or their information within the app and then feed it back in to the AMS. And he was like, oh, wow, but these are standards for this. And it's just thinking about taking them, and maybe it wasn't what the standard was designed for initially. I mean, with Add Edit, we're always thinking about listings, but hey, you can take this thing and you can use it to update roster information and feed back in that way. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us to build on these. And crickets, so we don't really have anything. So if you got anything, by all means, let us know, and we'll work on it, right?
Certainly, yes. Yeah. As you say, but it's really interesting to think about how the standard has evolved and the wealth that's in there. Like you're saying, you look at that model, and that could be a broker who has a tech stack. There are a lot of different ways to really, look at the technology that really is the database, et cetera, that speaks that common language, and it's well documented, using the API. So you really do have, if you can, kind of get to that common, language database, you really can open up innovation, within your marketplace for brokers, who want to be a little different, set themselves apart, et cetera. We're really looking at trying to work on that. As you say, because the MLS data really, is normalized, it's cleaned up, et cetera. So we're looking at, using that incomplete status to fill brokers' marketing platforms, because then, it's the same text, it's the same everything. So there's just so much out there, and there's, you look at the breadth of the work groups and the experience that's happening out there. There really is a lot. So and that's what we're here to do. So if there's anything R&D can take on for you,
Speaking of a lot, how many graphics did we need to have on here just to show that we didn't have anything going on? It's like, you guys get the point? With 2 crickets, 2 empty shopping carts.
Yeah. And I'm not embarrassed to say that we spent a non-trivial amount of time debating GIF or GIF when we were talking.
Yeah, I don't even
about
know. Is it
these
GIF or
slides,
GIF? What is it? I still don't know.
If you don't say GIF, you're wrong, but that's...
Oh, okay. All right. There we go.
All right. So yeah, that's projects for that. But hopefully, I honestly, I'll say kudos to you guys. To get through the backlog is really, really impressive. And then be able to start new is going to be a good thing. So yeah, it's nothing right now, but hopefully by the end of the day, I'm sure everyone in this room is going to be happy to give you guys plenty of work to do. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah, hang around for pain points. We'll be taking notes.
Oh,
yes.
Promise.
All right, the warm-up hour.
Now listen, I just want to say, I told Chris, comedy is hard, right? It's hard to be funny. So with that preface,
You've been doing great already.
I know, but here we go. Now we got.
So one of the things we wanted to do, and this is not a roast of like people in the room or anything like that. It's not even like a traditional roast in the sense of like we're really making fun of something. What we're roasting is we've got a few of the really interesting concepts that are out there today. So some of the things that Paul mentioned that have been ratified, some of the things that are in process. And what we're going to roast is the misconceptions, a little bit of them. And hopefully what it can do, especially leading into pain points, is get everyone in this room thinking creatively about different ways that we can approach certain problems in the industry. Different ways that we can approach using RESO to solve those problems. And hopefully, whether it's for giving us ideas on the best practices guide at Interop to help write those stories, or creating new projects for R&D, giving us some work to do, basically, is what we're looking for here. So we're gonna have a little bit of fun with it. It's not gonna be like nonstop jokes.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you guys aren't, doubled over, laughing so hard that,
But we are gonna try and lean into it, like,
okay.
All right, so first things first. We do want to talk about 010. This is ratified, as Paul mentioned before. And it's, we're going to give the number, the name, and a little like short definition about it. So this is obviously like define how you create, update, and delete data in the RESO web API. So 010 is something that has been around for quite a while and has, as Paul mentioned, just got redone a little bit and is ready to go. And they're thinking about adding media to it. Like, we're really working to make that fleshed out. But the idea is, what's really interesting is, as long as this has been around, it's only been really the last year that we started to see people really implement and use it. And in having discussions, we realized a lot of that, I think, had to do with intimidation of like just trying to take on an entire project like that, right? We did write, I actually wrote mine down. These guys were more brave and...
I don't even have any jokes. It's all you, buddy. Mine are I'm an improv comic. I don't...
So, right off the bat, I think one of the major misconceptions here that we heard, so my first joke, is I really don't understand why we have this. Because why would you go anywhere else other than the MLS to update data? The MLS has the best technology. We spend the most money. We have the most development talent, the most resources. Who else could possibly do it better than the MLS?
Huh? Oh. See, now I told him he's thinking Norm McDonald, so you gotta say it more like Norm McDonald would say it, right?
You gotta next one.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, how about this one? Like, there's already enough crud in real estate. Do we really need any more?
Hi-yo.
But I mean, you really look at the practical implication. It doesn't mean that you need to create a listing, through the API. It may be as easy as, you walk out of the house with the price change, and at least you don't have to drive to the office or wait to open your laptop. You can do, kind of that on-the-run stuff. Change the hours on your open house. Well, gosh, we can stay open a couple more hours because it's busy, things are happening, whatever. So, I mean, they're very simple and practical uses without having to go really big. But I mean, with an ad edit and some business rules, you can do lots of things, with a phone. And it may be even, at some point with your RPR app or your, local broker app and those things. So it doesn't have to be, an MLS labeled app.
Is there a joke here that maybe your jokes are cruddy? Is that it?
I think, you know what, right? I've decided my audience is just Paul. Paul's laughing. So
yeah, all right. Well, they say all right, there you go. Find that one person.
But I mean, in this one too, MRED in particular is very excited about like the media addition to ad edit, because we've had a lot of discussion in our local market with photography companies. And photography companies as a service would really like to be able to upload that media on behalf of their clients and rearrange that media, maybe do things like captions. So that's something that to us is a very, very specific use case that now we're gonna like hopefully see what comes out of that, contribute if we can, maybe even do a prototype around it based on what comes out of transport, because we feel that is a really good use case that isn't an entire add edit module, right? Like it's a very simple, very specific thing that solves a real problem for agents in our market, but also for like some ancillary companies in our market. It brings them closer into the ecosystem, which is always a good thing too. So as you're thinking about like the web API added, I think that was a couple good examples right there, but that's the kind of things we're looking for is like, what are other ways that we could get creative with standards like this? What are other ways that you could, just slightly modify something, doing it on the move, updating a status, updating a price, whatever it might be, something that needs to be more real time. You don't need to change the entire thing. I don't think we're at the point yet where someone's gonna create an entire listing from scratch on the go. Maybe some brave souls will try that out, but I think for most of us, we have 50 to 100 fields. That might be a bit much, but modifying
you can start small. I mean, that's what some of the people here talked about earlier. But here's a question. How many people would like the ability to write into your AMS system so that your members could go in and update their roster information and have that automatically fed in? Would anybody, right? I don't know. I mean, AMSs have always been like, we have to manually do it and you pull out, but wouldn't it be great to write stuff into it? Well, nobody, right? I mean, you can't be trusted, right? I mean, can't trust them with their own phone number.
Probably, I don't know about yours.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's some, so they say, wouldn't it be great to get the state license information and pump that right in there? Yeah. Well, and so some do that, and I think, that would be ideal, and it would be great to build that within your MLS and have people automatically inactive, or an MLS PIN did a great job because they're in-house, but where they took the license information and you knew when someone, and you put a message in the MLS system, so when they logged in, hey, your license is going to expire in 30 days or whatever, and it was really great. So there's all sorts of creative business things that can be done with these standards, and we can expand or build on the standards to do more of that and be productive.
And it'd be nice to do it publicly instead of, I heard scraping in the back, so yes.
Did somebody say scraping?
Oh yes, definitely was scraping in the back there. Don't raise your hand, we don't want to know.
All right.
Of course Steve said that.
Next slide.
All right, next up, and this is actually a good segue there, because maybe in working with these other states, or with the states, they're not MLSs, they're not gonna do web API, so maybe common format and coming up with a really simple JSON payload back and forth could be a good use case for exactly what we just talked about there, which it pains me to say it because I just can't believe that the MLS isn't the center of the world. Next, you're gonna tell me that, the Earth revolves around the sun, and I'm gonna tell you to take a seat, Galileo, but there are other people out there besides MLSs, and Sam showed it at the start of the conference. Like, we're getting some good implementations here, and having the common format allows the data dictionary to live outside of Web API in a way that's a lot easier to work with for companies that aren't MLSs. And the reason why we have this diagram on here, Josh, if you're watching, when I was probably a year or two in, he was trying to explain a common schema to me. Remember, hello world, one language. So he was trying to explain common schema, and I think after like 2 hours, he finally sent me a picture of this shape of box, this box shape. He said, were you ever a kid and played with this? Like, yes. He's like, play with it again, that's common schema. You gotta fit the square in the square hole, the circle in the circle hole. Like
I could watch this video all day and it's still cute every time that little kid lifts that up, right? That's something.
Yes.
But I mean, the practical use right now is I'm talking to a couple of our shareholders, AMS vendors, because they think that people will call the MLS when they change their address or they change their email address, but they may not let the association know. So I mean, if we can pull their data, and I mean, common format seems to be, something I think it's easy to ask them to build. I mean, it's easy to build a JSON, basically payload, and it's easy to ingest a JSON payload, really. And you can probably start with your hello world code, and you're just about there. But it really, so there, these things that we built and put together, I mean, you really, I think it's easy to ask a vendor to use, some data dictionary fields and just wrapper them and deliver them to you. And then all we've got to do is compare the two data sets and send an email to front desk at theassociation.com and say, these 3 people have a new email address. This person changed their last name. Those kinds of things. So, I mean, we can really make sure that the data stays in sync and it is quality on both sides.
Anything for you on that one, John?
No, I was just thinking, what's the roast? Do you have a roast joke for
Well, that was
this?
the Galileo joke.
Oh, that was
everyone
the,
laughed at.
oh.
All right, next up. Validating expressions, business rules. I know Matt Cohen, are you still in here? Matt's been a big rules proponent for a long time.
He left after that Galileo joke.
I know, yeah, it's brutal. Next time though, you know where we messed up on the roast? Every roast is supposed to, thanks, there you are, Matt, how you doing? Every roast, we're supposed to be behind a table with cocktails. The audience is supposed to have drinks. That's where we went wrong. I just think Sam was worried about how
now you're
painful pain
talking.
points we get if we already had a couple drinks in us. So validating expressions, I think true system of choice doesn't work without being able to transport business rules. And hopefully everyone in the room feels that. Like, I don't know about the rest of you. Maybe some of you feel like you don't mind that your data is locked down and you don't need it to go anywhere. It can stay where it needs to be. But that's something that is really, really important when you're talking about any of these system of choice, is being able to push those rules wherever they need to go. And the more we open up the system and open up the ecosystem, I think Richard was mentioning that earlier in his panel, like we need to have the quality data coming in no matter who is submitting or creating that data. And that's why the rules become so important, and being able to have a set of rules that's not just machine executable, but also human readable. Like, can you understand that? Can you share that with someone who isn't familiar with real estate? And can they be able to work with that and be able to program against it? So having these executable rules, and what 019 is trying to do is make that in a way that you can have them both be vendor and technology agnostic. So great examples in that RCP. Hopefully you're all spending as much time in the transport GitHub as the 3 of us are, reading through everything on a daily basis. But if you're not, definitely would recommend you go take a look at that.
I actually got PTSD from this. PTSD, right? I went to Catholic schools. I had a nun take out a chunk of my hair one time, because can you believe it? I was talking in class and making jokes, and she just, and I know, it still hasn't grown back yet, right?
No, I mean, there's a lot here when you think about what it can bring you. The other thing I found interesting, because we did go through actually documenting our business rules, is a lot of that's like tribal knowledge. I mean, until you really can get almost to the code level, it's quite the exercise to really think about all those dependencies, and dates have to be yesterday or in the future for certain things. Today, or sold dates can't be in the future when you're marking a listing sold. I mean, a lot of that's straightforward, but then there are those kind of funny hidden things that got built 10 years ago. You ask the vendor to do, and somebody's gone. And its first thing is, I mean, we had a few moments like, really, the system does that, or it really is doing that instead of what we thought it was. So, I mean, what you think and sometimes what reality is really different. And I mean, the brokers really want to know. You think our help desk people want to really know that we understand what our business rules are, what's required when you check certain boxes, what fields just vanish from forms maybe at times. So, even just having, the documentation that you can just start, like you say, in human, form, and then it can be coded, as long as it still makes sense to you. Yeah.
For the MLSs in the room, how many of you have your rules in a format that you could easily take it anywhere and just share with anyone? Yeah. That's a really big problem in the industry right now. And that's why
it is.
I think that's why we spent so much time on system of choice and talking about it, and ad edit and talking about it, is it is very, very closely paired with this here. So until you figure out a way to understand, and the rules are, that's one of the cores of the MLS, right? Like, without the rules, what are we doing for data quality? So I think that's really important to think about, and it's a project that takes a long time to do, and you have to really put a lot of resources toward it, but the outcome on the other end can be a really positive one when you do that. So.
Yeah.
Anything else on rules?
No.
All right.
Yeah, we're really good at rules.
Let's stop traumatizing John and anyone else in the audience here.
I just realized I'm the only one that's got water up here, by the way. It sucks. Sorry, guys.
Oh, you know what we don't have enough of in real estate?
Bad jokes.
Yes. Events. We don't have enough events in real estate.
Yeah.
I wish we had more places to
Do
go
tell.
to. Yes, yes. We've talked a lot about the entity event resource and replication model, mostly in last conference, a little bit in this conference too. And this one paired with push replication using webhooks. So this one, at a very high level, 27, the event resource, is replacing timestamps with an event record. So rather than making sure that your timestamps are matching up with the timestamps on the other side and understanding like when something happened and if the timestamp gets screwed up, are you in the right time zone even, timestamps getting replaced with an event record is just sequential then. So this event happened at number 1, this event happened at 222, this event happened at 333. So you know really easily like what order that happened in, especially for things like status changes. It gives you a great log to be able to look back to. And then push replication is tied to that because then if you have a change in the sequence, can you create a push out to those consumers? So instead of them having to constantly hit your database, can you then push that out there? So the analogy for that, outside of obviously our unnamed friendly neighborhood superhero, because we don't want to be sued, we're not making any money off this up here, so please leave us alone, Marvel and Disney. Uh-oh.
That's the bad joke alarm.
Ooh, well that's...
Amber alert or something.
Oh, is it an Amber Alert?
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody call Spider-Man. Wow.
All right.
Definitely that mood kill.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, so a really bad analogy to this is fishing. I don't want to have to keep throwing my line back into the water again and again and again to try and catch a fish and see if a fish is down there. I want to chuck a hunk of dynamite in there and have all the fish pushed up to the top of the water for me, and then I'll just scoop them up. Like that is really, I think, a very crude way of thinking about it, but it is the idea of like, do I have to keep replicating every single thing over and over again, even if I don't need it, right? Like, are there certain things that I can just pull, or can I have those things pushed to me, especially if there's a certain level of trust between the provider and the consumer? Anything else on that one for you guys?
I mean, really, it's like real-time updates. I mean, as the system event happens, as a data consumer, you get noticed. I mean, because we watch our API, people are sometimes knocking on that door every few seconds to see what's happening. And it doesn't matter, once they build those jobs, they run 24 hours a day. And there could be an hour or two in the middle of the night that nothing happens. But, you get just, knock, knock, and they're poking, at your database. And you think with a cloud spend, there's some pennies that start to add up a little bit too, operationally. So, I mean, being able to say, hey, here's the 3 events, that happen, and they can, know it's time to log in and grab that stuff and really keep track so they're not having to go backwards too. Because, normally you're watching vendors pull a 20-minute, back type delta just in case they miss something or, that was riding as, we updated our last timestamp, those kinds of funky technical things. But so, I mean, this really solves lots of, I think, operational problems, and it really does a better job for the data consumers to keep them really in sync. Or if they have a burp, they know, I can go back to this number and then march forward. Yeah.
And going back to the rules, we just talked about having a rules, your own rules database, understanding what your rules are. But then we did talk about like what happens when things change. A lot of us in this room are going to have a whole bunch of rules changes in the coming months, right? Like in the next 2 months, we're going to have to push some rule changes out there. How nice would that be if you have a separated rules engine and then you're using 28 to do push using webhooks to say, hey, we just changed this rule. We need you to accept it and update it on your side. Like that is between 2 already existing standards out there. Like that's 2 things that could be tied together that could be really, really useful. Because rules, this resource is not something you're probably going to be replicating every single day. You're just going to want to know when something's changed, and it's going to change relatively rarely. So something like this could be a good use case for that. So another idea of like how can you think about unique or creative ways to come at a problem using RESO standards.
Yeah.
So, anything for you on this one, John?
Yeah, no, I mean, so to that point about like an IDX rules, and even like we were talking about the spreadsheet or whatever, but if an MLS changes its IDX display rules or whatever, this would be a great way for a vendor to know that this particular MLS has made a change. And we don't have to give listing agent attribution, for example, now just listing broker attribution. That's just as an example. So.
Right. Okay. Next up then, the autofill service. So this one's in progress still, not ratified yet. Well, last I checked last week, so hopefully I'm not wrong on that one, Paul. Okay, good. So during the MLS listing input process, the idea here is that you could potentially have a URL that would include an autofill object that would automatically complete certain fields within your listing input form. The idea that maybe it's not such a good thing to have 2 or 3 people trade information back and forth and then manually enter those fields after it's been handed through 3 different sets of companies might not be the worst thing in the world, right? Like just take the data from the source and pop it right in where it belongs. And that's the idea behind the autofill service. And this is something that certainly media companies would be very interested in, floor plan companies would be very interested in, but could there be other uses too? So any place where you have a small collection of fields that's relatively standard, to be repetitive on the theme for today, that could automate and auto-populate into your system.
I mean, think of, computer vision, right? And checking off those kitchen features. I mean, there's just a whole lot of use case here. And you get accuracy. I mean, you probably get a better listing often with that kind of help. And, it's convenient, obviously, for the, input person because they missed the dishwasher, it saw it, it clicked the box, and on you go. Yeah.
All right. Moving on. Single feeds also in progress, where we'd have a new field called field type or feed type, which would be included to highlight the resources and fields based on permissions that'd be available to a consumer. This one's an interesting one because if there's one thing we have a lot of in this industry, it's trust between everyone in this room and outside of this room. We all really trust each other a lot, yes. But if you're a data consumer and you're working with an IDX feed, a VOW feed, a broker back office feed, a broker only feed, a syndication feed, like it can get really messy really quick, and it does create a lot of opportunities for issues too. If you get those feeds mixed up, if you don't have structure set up correctly. So this has been something that's been talked about a lot. There are people in the industry who are already doing this and supporting it, not the feed type, but doing single feeds. And the idea is like how much, at least in our mind, like how much difference is there between an IDX, a VOW, a broker back office? Like usually it's just a handful of fields, typically, right? And is there a better way to serve that up to consumers? So again, maybe you're helping to control costs a little bit because you have just one feed, they're working off of that, they're doing their processes on their side, but then really clearly defining, which field can be used where and how.
And so just to clarify, and I'm going to lean on Paul a little bit, but when we say in progress, some of these things are draft spec, right, that people can go and use and test, or? Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
If you couldn't hear that, Paul said if they're in draft, you can start confidently developing against them because they're well down the process.
And that helps us refine them, right? So we rely on people using draft spec and then we ratify it, right? So that's why we're encouraging you to go and try these things out.
Well, and in preparing for today, even just looking at this one tied with, back with 27 and 28, what was interesting is in 27 and 28, there's a section there called handling record visibility. And I'm not gonna recite it from memory because I don't remember it, but it was something I was like, I gotta talk to Josh about this because it seemed like a really interesting way to maybe add an extra level of permissions to the single feed by tying it with the entity event resource and how it handles records as far as like, if you have permission to access a field and you're getting that record of the event sequence, and then all of a sudden the event sequence stops, that could potentially be a really good indicator that you no longer have access to that field and you shouldn't be showing it anymore. So that was part of the RCP in 27, 28. And that's where it's nice. It's almost nice to read all of these at one go because it starts clicking and connecting ideas in your head about maybe even how you can tie these things together. So, anything for you on that one? All right, cool. I didn't write any jokes for this one. I forgot.
Really? Did you write jokes for the previous ones? Because I didn't really hear them.
I've been cutting them in half. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about these forever. ULI especially is one that is near and dear to my heart that I'm hoping at some point we can get these going. We need help on the, Josh could really use some help on this one, I think, doing some of the legwork. But I mean, the ULI, the whole idea is, just even in one MLS, there are a lot of times, we have somebody in the same person in 5 times because you need to have them in each office location. And so, and then people are consuming that data, and how do they know that this is the same person, this individual, these 5 individuals are the same person, and then you do that with the neighboring MLS and the neighboring MLS. So we have a pretty good model built now that will match, right? Create a ULI and give a confidence score, but we really need to build like a usable interface to make that work and all that. But I can't wait for this one to go out. I know some other folks in the room I think are pretty anxious for this as well.
Yeah, I certainly am. I mean, because we serve 2 states. So, I mean, you know, if you've got a license in each, you've got a login in each. And it's you really, for a showing product, sometimes, you know, they end up as, you know, 2 unique people, and you know it, the database knows it, but it's really hard when you're starting to send data outward that, you know, this, you know, all of this wraps up into, you know, a single person agent instead of, you know, different identifiers. So having that common in the database really helps.
What's the snowflake? I don't know. Is that the joke? What is
Because
that?
everyone's unique. We're all special snowflakes.
Oh, God.
Sometimes the joke is in the pictures, John.
Yes.
The joke was on you for agreeing to be in this workgroup with me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you should have watched like any of my past presentations and known that was a bad idea.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I mean, from ULI, like the call's coming from in the room, like MRED is very interested in ULI. We think that's gonna be really, really important, especially as we get into data shares and we work on partnerships with other MLSs, like that's gonna be critical going across borders. So it'd be interesting just from the 2 of you, like what's the next steps on that? What do you need from the people in this room to make that a reality?
You know, I wish I had Josh here to answer that question because he really needs help. You know, I mean, email dev@reso.org and he can tell you what he needs. I just think he needs some people to commit some time to really build the product, I guess, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think really to keep building it out. Yeah. I mean, he's got some great code. I mean, and you know, it's posted, I believe.
Yeah, it is, right. Yeah, the matching algorithm.
So, I mean, you know, if you want to play with it, certainly give it a try, even against your own, you know, data. And I mean, it really is interesting because I mean, you know, it helps you even look at your own data. And you know, they're not all those licensees are all over the country. I mean, we're Portland, Oregon, and we've got people from Texas and all over as part of our membership. And the other thing is, you know, as you say, you've got often for all kinds of business reasons, you know, that same person in multiple times.
Right.
And, you know, you want to send a survey out or something, you know, and they don't want to get 6 or 7 of those. I think it's really a great tool to help us. And the UPI, I mean, obviously think of property history, those kinds of things. It really does show you, you know, how to join that together. Because sometimes even a tax ID will change. But, you know, you want to really keep, you know, that 123 Main Street is 123 Main Street. Yeah.
We got 2.5 minutes, guys.
Yeah. Well, so I guess on this one, just to wrap this slide up, if you're an MLS or a vendor working to put together data shares, I know there's a lot of them. We've got a slide from FMLS of all the different data shares they're doing. It'd be great if that seems like the right type of group to really test this out and really put this into place and tell us what works and what doesn't. So maybe we can add that to a future iteration of the data dictionary, which is how we end up here. And data dictionary is, we are the world, especially today. You know, we are creating this interoperability with having these standard data elements. It's letting us have that language. And we've talked about a lot of different ways today about how we make that language exist outside of the MLSs. So it's no longer just about putting it in a web API. It is about things like common format. And are you trying to look at who the people are on there?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you put our faces in there and all.
No, I didn't do that.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, that would have been the joke, you guys.
No, it's a great Netflix doc, though, if you haven't watched it already. But yeah, data dictionary, it all comes back to that. And how do we continue to get those standardized elements out there, make it easy for everyone in the ecosystem to use, to go beyond just the MLSs. So this is definitely the call to MLSs to finish up, which is that, you know, it's the carrot, and we want to keep chasing that carrot, right? And we want to keep continuing to improve, keep getting better, but we need to actually start chasing the carrot a little bit. That's part of why MRED hired the people we did, because we wanted to start building some of these things out, testing some of these, putting these together. I know we've got a couple MLSs in the room who are doing that, but until MLSs start to get a little bit more open with that information, I think it's going to be a lot harder for other people to do that. But I think it's a good way to think about how you can get creative on behalf of all your members and all the partners you work with. So hopefully you just do it and try it out. But we're interested in feedback, info@reso.org. Hopefully this, thank you for indulging us.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll have some good things for pain points.
The pain point was going to be that previous session.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you,
very much,
everybody.